Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we're joined by Belinda Hyde, who's the Chief HR Officer at SPX FLOW. Belinda, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. Before we jump in, Belinda, tell everyone a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Yeah, so, I kind of fell into HR accidentally at the tail end of completing graduate school, where I was studying industrial and organizational psychology. And I was really fortunate to be part of a practical program where a lot of the professors did consulting work and things like that. And so I had a glimpse into the difference between sitting in an underground lab doing tests on undergraduate students for extra credit versus going into an organization and solving problems, looking at organizational performance and leadership and team dynamics and workforce planning. And I found that to be a really compelling way to spend my time. So I really enjoyed the idea and went to work for really a wide variety of companies. So I've been in a lot of different industries. And that's been intentional on my part, whether it was chemicals or technology, biotech, metals, now in a more kind of traditional industrial manufacturing space. And then I also have had the opportunity to live all over the place. So I've worked all over the United States. I've lived in Southeast Asia for a short time. So I really focused on getting a pretty wide variety of experiences and different parts of HR in order to kind of build a portfolio that then would allow me to play at this level in the organization and really have a systemic influence on the performance of an organization and really the satisfaction and happiness of the people that work in it.
Tell everyone, the people aren't aware of the business, give us a quick overview of the organization.
Yeah, so SPX FLOW, we're about a $2 billion business. We operate in about 35 countries around the world with about 7,000 employees. And what we focus in is on basically helping our customers solve pretty tough process problems, process solutions. So we sell equipment, things like pumps and valves and mixers and homogenizers that really help a customer take a bunch of ingredients and make something out of it and then move it around. And so, what our expertise is really around process applications and how do you bake yogurt? How do you transform a bunch of ingredients into something else in a very controlled way to get the quality and the viscosity and the taste and all the things that you'd like to get out of it? So that's what we do. We sell equipment that helps our customers do that.
I'm always fascinated by the companies that I come across that I haven't come across before. Me and Shane always talk about when you go over to the US, every other company is like $1 billion company. So tell me a bit more about the background, because obviously it's a spin-off from the larger organization, SPX Corporation. Is that correct? If I got that right?
Yes. So about 4 years ago, and that's when I joined the organization, was at the time of the spin-off. So SPX Corp, which still exists today, is much more of I would call it a portfolio company. A lot of interesting brands. And particularly in their past history, it was really a lot about buying and selling companies, bringing in an underperforming asset in the industrial space, turning it around. And, the corporate team really spent a lot of time on kind of managing that portfolio. And so they built this incredible portfolio of flow products, which are the types of things that I was describing, and then spun it off so that company could have its own independent business strategy and capital funding model and all that kind of stuff. So SPX FLOW spun off as a completely different public entity, publicly traded. A lot of the board came with us, came with FLOW, and then most of the senior leadership team came with FLOW as well. And I think another important part of kind of the start of FLOW is that we changed CEOs right about that same time. So at the time we spun off, then about 2 or 3 months later, the current CEO who came from the original organization retired, and then we promoted a new CEO from within, and that really kind of, I think, started our journey as a new company.
It's a pretty tough time to jump in the hot seat as a CHRO, right? So so was that why you jumped in?
For me, there were a couple of things that were really attractive about coming into the role. One was that I had been out of the roles of making things for a while. So I've been in a metals recycling organization, and I really, that's where you take things and you rip them up and you put them in a ship and you shipped off to some anonymous customer in Southeast Asia. It was kind of how the business worked at that point. And I really missed making stuff. I missed the manufacturing process of, that physical nature of bringing something to market that had differentiation and the ability to kind of capture market share, those types of things. And so that was one thing that attracted me to SPX FLOW. And the other was the opportunity to, in some respects, build something from scratch. It wasn't a brand new company. We had resources, we had a team, we had our products and our brands and our strategies in place. But I knew that it would be a transformative experience and creating something new from the foundation. And that's what I found really exciting about the opportunity.
So what, in your opinion, what's HR's role in business transformation?
I think it's huge. I think HR is in a really unique position to be influencing key business processes across the board, whether it's around our compensation, our performance management processes. In the CHRO role, you can also have influence on the other business processes in the organization and making sure that they all fit together. And so I feel like, a big part of my role is linking between all the different functions and business pieces of the organization to make sure that everything works together, because it's all one big system. You change something on one side and it's going to have impacts all the way through the system. And you have to know how all that stuff's going to work together. And I think that the CHRO and the HR team is somewhat in a better position to see all those pieces than maybe some other parts of the organization.
Where do you start? What's for you when you've led multiple transformations right now, and you're going for a new one right now?
Yeah, exactly.
In the business, what's the starting place look like? What kind of questions are you asking yourself in the business?
Yeah, I think the starting place is with the overall business strategy. What are we really trying to accomplish? What's going to be different about our business tomorrow because we're going through this than it is today? I think that, that's the core question, that you have to create absolute clarity and absolute alignment among your leadership team in order to have the greatest impact, because then that's going to be the guide that tells you what are the highest leverage points that we need to hit within the organization in order to create this change.
And is that one of the factors that you think that holds companies back, that they don't have that clear message? What's normally the main thing you see that's holding businesses back during transformation?
I think it is a lack of time of the senior leadership team together to figure it out. So someone has, the CEO or some other senior leader in the organization has an idea in their head of what they want to accomplish. And they talk to a few people about it, and then they start down the path, but they don't have alignment of all the critical players, and there's not clarity. So if you haven't had those in-depth conversations and a little bit of the churn that creates, and trying to, well, what do you mean by this word? What do you mean by becoming an operating company? What is that going to look like differently in the future? If you don't take the time to have those conversations and hash it out, you run the risk of everybody on the team running off in a different direction, trying to create this new reality, but the new reality actually looks different for all of them. And so I think that can be a really big barrier to an effective transformation and change, is that lack of alignment up front. And I think the CHRO role can be a forcing mechanism to make that happen, in terms of asking the right questions, bringing the right people together in the same room, and really, kind of facilitating that conversation amongst people who really probably don't want to have it.
What about you personally? You've led multiple changes. What challenges have you faced personally during these change processes? Because no one talks about that part, the stress. It's not easy, right?
Yeah, it's not easy. So I'll take it from a couple of different angles. One angle that I didn't really appreciate until I got into the CHRO role was the level of kind of personal responsibility and accountability I feel for the success of the transformation and the impact that it has on people. When I was a layer or two down in the organization, I could always look up and I could say, those guys don't know what they're doing. They're doing it all wrong. If I were in charge, I'd be doing X, Y, and Z. And now that I'm in that spot, I feel just a tremendous personal responsibility to make it go well. And when I hear, I have one friend in my network that I always kind of test big ideas against, because she sits in the middle of an organization and she'll always call me when she's like, that doesn't make any sense. That's just, business speak. What are you even talking about? And I want to make sure that we don't fall into those traps. And I know we do occasionally, but I want to make sure that the impact of the transformation on people, as they understand why we're doing it, they see that it's going to add value, and that they're going to receive some personal and professional benefit out of it as well. So for me, that's the toughest part, is feeling that responsibility and kind of every little glitch along the way, I feel accountable for. It's like, man, we shouldn't have done it that way, or we could have done that differently, and people would feel differently and perhaps be able to be more productive during this time.
What was the main things that you identified that you needed to change as a business?
In terms of the larger transformations, I'll go back to a biotech company that I worked with that was really trying to make a transformation from a collection of, once again, kind of pretty interesting products and brands that have been developed through acquisitions into a more integrated company that created consistent long-term shareholder value, and moving from very much a startup into a more mature company model. And so there, I think, one of the first things that we focused on that I think was the most powerful was alignment around what was going to make us successful. So I know that a lot of companies do this, but it's, kind of putting together your strategic framework, your strategic imperatives, your strategic initiatives that really define what's important to you as an organization. It's typically 3 or 4 things. In the case of this company, it was built around a balanced scorecard to say, we're going to win at the customer. We're going to win back the bench, which is, their customers were scientists at the bench. We're going to do things better every day, which was a continuous improvement platform. We're going to reach these financial objectives, and we're going to build a winning culture. And it was much more catchy than that. I can't remember the specific words we used, but that was something new for that company to put in that kind of framework, and then to continue to build on that framework. We called it building a winning way. And everything that we talked about over the next couple of years, we were able to hook back into that framework. Why are we making this change? Why did this decision happen the way it did? It was to support one of these 3 or 4 platforms in the organization. And that was, to me, a surprising impact that people adopted it really quickly. As soon as they had a framework, they adopted it. They started doing their business operating reviews with that framework. It was a language that the organization adopted that allowed us to actually talk about what we were doing in a really efficient and effective way. And it was the first time I had gone through that process of developing that kind of framework. And I guess I was just really surprised at how quickly it took on and how powerful it was within the organization. And it's a practice that I've put in place in the other organizations that I've been in that have started down a transformation, is just a really clear conceptual, practical framework that gives people an idea of, here are the 3 or 4 most important things that we've got to do. And then you hook every single message into those 3 or 4 platforms.
What did the communication look like then? How did you communicate that to the business?
It starts with CEO communications. And so in this particular example, we were small enough that we could have employee all hands meetings. And so that's how it was introduced to the organization. It was probably if I think about it, the beginning of an annual business cycle, and really establishing for every employee in the organization, the CEO providing this personal message around what it looks like. And then from a process perspective, you start to build it in. So I believe that we had built the same framework into our performance management process in terms of how we're thinking about your goals and objectives and how your goals and objectives should be aligned. So that was another powerful mechanism, is integrating it there. And really in all of our corporate internal communications, that was the key theme. And so it really, after that, it just grew quite organically. As I mentioned, even in the business operating reviews, they started to adopt the framework, even though we hadn't put out a template for them to do so, for the business leaders to use that. It was useful enough for them that they actually just did it as part of their natural course of business.
I have a question from Farid on LinkedIn. Belinda, he said, do you feel that HR gets the credibility needed from peers when it comes to business-related transformation?
Well, I think that's really dependent upon the organization and the HR team. So there are some organizations where you've got a huge resistance to HR playing this role, and that's a real challenge. And the techniques that you have to use in that condition are probably different than the techniques that I've used, because I've been fortunate to be in organizations where HR was wanted at the table. And I think a key to maintaining that level of people wanting you at the table is bringing forth practical solutions that are focused on how are we achieving the business strategy, and not to get too tied up in the mechanics, how it's going to work, and not to get too tied up, particularly in the impact of HR. Let me see if I can rephrase that a little bit. I think it's easy to get, when you're engaged in a conversation with business leaders, it's really easy to think about, how's that going to impact HR? How's it going to impact the people? What needs to happen to our processes? What needs to change? And you need to think about all of that. But what your business leaders really want you to be thinking about is participating in the larger conversation. What is the impact going to be on the organization? Is this the right direction? Have we thought about all of the key design principles? They wouldn't call it that, but we thought about all of the principles that need to be in place in order to make this work. And then from an HR perspective, we expect you as a leader to go off and take care of the details, but they want you playing at a higher level and pulling out key themes, core ideas, and things that need to happen, and then facilitating the execution of that, whether it's through HR or whether it's through other teams in the organization. So I think that's a really important piece, is keeping it practical, keeping it grounded in the whole business, not just HR.
Yeah. Matthew had a question as well. He said, are you using data to inform strategic decisions currently? If so, how much of an impact has data given you as a CHRO and made in your experience?
Yeah, I think data is incredibly important to have rational conversations with your leadership team. And when I started here at SPX FLOW, we had very little data in HR, as well as across the board. So I mean, part of our overall business transformation has been getting in place data that informs our decisions, whether it's financial data, product data, customer data, or HR data. And so it took us a couple of years to really build up even just some, I would say we're still at a foundational place for our data. We have much more accurate and descriptive kinds of data in terms of, I can tell you, this is kind of embarrassing. Today, I can tell you how many engineers we have around the world and where they are and what they're working on. 3 years ago, I couldn't tell you that. If you ask me how many engineers do you have, it's like, I don't know. So this is, I think the data is a really important entry point into the conversation. And particularly if you have a data-centric leadership team, which mine certainly is, that's the starting point. You know, whenever we're talking about putting in a new program or a new process, we start with, here is the information that we have about our current state, whether it's about utilization or headcount or turnover data, any of these kinds of things, what our employee survey tells us. That's a starting point. And then we compare that and say, this is what we have learned from benchmark organizations as well, and how we stack up to that. And here's a solution that we think is going to improve our impact and thus our metrics in these areas.
Mm-hmm. Looking back at your experience, leading back to the transformation piece as well, what are the main lessons you learned along the way, the sort of do's and the don'ts, or things you've done differently that you could share with everyone listening?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to go back to my notes on that one. And one of these I already talked about is that power of clarity and alignment. And if you don't get that clarity and alignment up front with your senior leadership team, you have no chance of actually making real change happen, because it's just so disjointed, and you can't create the level of focus that's needed to change. The other thing that I'd mentioned that I learned and I still wrestle with in every major transformation is the balance between the system and the individual action. So you have to think about how the whole system is changing and how you're going to impact all the different pieces of that. But in any individual action, it only impacts one piece. You have to break it down into those chunks to actually work on it. You can't influence the whole system at once. You can only influence one process or one method at a time. And so I think it's really important to pick the biggest levers first, like what's going to have the greatest impact, and focus on getting a couple or two or three of those things done, and then the rest will follow. And you have to trust that. And that's the hardest thing for me, is to trust that, the rest of it will follow. I can start on these areas, and that's going to start the change. It's not comprehensive. It's not going to get everything, but it'll start us down the path, and then we'll be able to pick up these additional things that we need to change and adjust along the way.
Do you feel that method also helps the impact that it has culturally on the business? Because if you make too many changes in one go, people could become disconnected.
I've had a few conversations lately within my own organization about that, where I thought we'd done a really good job of kind of connecting all of these pieces together and what we were changing and why and how they were all building each other. And someone was in my office and said, we said we were going to be an operating company, but then we said we were going to do lean, and then we said we were going to do this 80-20 thing. It's like, so which is it? To me, that was a real eye opener, because it was someone that was a direct report to an officer level in the company. And if they don't get it, just think about, our frontline employee that sees all of these terms thrown around. It's like, well, what is it that we're really trying to accomplish? So it reinvigorated me to think about the simplicity of our message and how you just have to continue to hone it and simplify it and not put too many things into it.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing journey. This isn't like a 2-3 month project. This is continuous. Right. What communication methods have you used in the past that have been most useful? Is it, one-on-one? Is it, company broadcast? Is it?
It's a combination of things. And so, I think the CEO level communications to the whole organization are very important. And using videos, I think is a lot more effective than memos. I think using live webcasts like this, where people have a chance to interact, is even more effective. We've just started using those kinds of communications here at SPX FLOW, and we've got really, really positive reactions to it, as opposed to the scripted, canned video that the CEO might do that just gets pushed out to everybody. So those are our key mechanisms for that top down. And then one of the most effective mechanisms I've seen for driving this throughout the organization is leader-led workshops, I'll call it. And we did this, and my experience in Dell is when I first experienced it. And then I've taken the methodology to several other companies that I've worked with. But it was, and so I'll talk about the Dell example because I think it was really powerful. We had a workshop called Leadership Imperative. And so every people leader in the organization, and this was an organization of 40, 50,000 people at the time, every people leader sat down with if they had managers on their team, sat down with their managers, and they spent a day talking about the future of the company. It was a facilitated conversation. They had materials to use. They were trained by their HR teams to do it. I think at Dell, we called it the Leadership Imperative. So we had that conversation. And that really, I think, empowered all of our managers across the world to feel like they had the story to tell. They knew what we were trying to accomplish. They'd had a chance to really process it and internalize the message so that then they could have the genuine conversations with their team. So as I said, I really like that methodology. We did it 2 or 3 years in a row at Dell. And then when I went on to other companies, it was a technique and a methodology that I took with me. And I find that the managers participating in those conversations really appreciate having that level of time and energy that's dedicated to helping them carry the message and be good messengers and think through how they're going to execute.
Was it just about delivering a message, or was it also about asking questions?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the conversation that's part of it. And so the opportunity to challenge, the opportunity to explore and to kind of go down the paths and say, well, and also the opportunity to weigh in. Say, you guys are telling us this is the company we want to be, but this is where we are. And that was a really important part of the conversation to say, okay, well, if there's a gap between the reality and our aspiration, how do we close it? What's our role in that? What's your role in it as a manager? How do you help your team kind of get past that gap and create the new reality? So that was to me, these tend to be fairly genuine conversations about topics that oftentimes are just kind of set to the side.
So which level did that go? Was it manager, director? What did it go down to?
At Dell, it went down to everybody, but it didn't touch, I don't think, the supervisors on the manufacturing floor, but all other managers participated in this conversation with their next level leader.
And what was the impact that came out of that?
Yeah, so I would say, we saw the impact very strongly. It just like the most quantitative way to look at it was in our employee engagement scores.
Yeah.
And so, we could do a cut on the managers, you could do a cut on employees. And we saw significant increases in questions around, understanding company strategy. I understand how I impact company strategy. Those kinds of questions is where you could see the most immediate impact. And I'd say I saw that at Dell. I saw it at the biotech I worked at. And I've seen it a little bit here as well.
Yeah, which of course is then going to lead to higher engagement scores.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, the individual engagement questions are giving you an idea of what's working and what's not. And so at least that first step removed of, do people hear this and do they feel like it's useful information to them and it's actually helping them do their jobs better? We can see that.
What other moments stand out to you during those change journeys that sort of made an impact that you think it would be valuable for everyone to hear?
One of the themes that I think is important that I've learned throughout time with these transformations is that the solution that you come up with for whatever it is that you're trying to do evolves over time. And so I'll talk about an example. I'll talk specifically about our bonus program here at SPX FLOW. When I start and using that as a mechanism and a lever to change transformation. So when I started in the organization, we had a very, very complex bonus program with lots of every single different product line had a different formula, and there was this huge matrix, and you were on or off the matrix, and it was very, very complicated, and everybody was incented for something different. And at that time, one of the things we were trying to increase in the transformation of the organization was to create more of a one company feel. We wanted to move from lots of different brands and products to actually an integrated operating company where we were leveraging across our customer base, we were leveraging across our facilities, and creating more of a one company mindset. So at that point, what we did is we went to a single bonus plan for our professional population, where it was 3 metrics. at an organizational level, around revenue, profitability, and cash flow. And so everybody in the entire organization, from the CEO down to the admin, was on the same bonus program. Number one, it helped us to send a specific message about the transformation we were trying to make. We got everybody on the same page, everybody thinking about the same metrics and caring about the same metrics. And that worked for us really well for 3-4 years. And now as we're going through our next transformation and how we're trying to do it, we're going to change the bonus program. And some people have said, well, why are you changing the bonus program again? It's like, because our conditions are different. The context in which we're operating and what we're trying to accomplish today is different than what we were trying to accomplish 3-4 years ago. And so now we're looking at how do we add more of business line performance back into the bonus program in order to create a little bit closer line of sight. In order to support our future business strategy, which is about growth and margin expansion and quality of revenue for specific products. And so it's easy to kind of look back and say, oh, we did it wrong the first time. It's like, well, no, we didn't do it wrong the first time. That was appropriate for that point in time and what we were trying to accomplish. And now we have a new set of goals. And so we're evolving to do that. And so, I think that's one of the things that I've learned is that the transformation journey that you go on is very context specific. And you mentioned it earlier, it never stops. And so you move from one transformation into the next if you're in a dynamic business. And you have to think about what that's going to mean in the long term and be okay with the fact that your solution today may be very different 3 years from now.
One of the things that I wrote down when we first spoke, which you mentioned so many times, and you kept talking about how do we make work easier for people? Yeah,
it's fascinating. When I joined the SPX FLOW, one of the things that I realized kind of very soon after talking to employees all over the world, they had incredible passion, they had incredible dedication to the customer, to the product, to the brand. They would bend over backwards. They would move the earth to try and meet their customer needs and to get things done that the organization wanted them to get done. It's like, but they were working so hard at it because we lacked standard process and we lacked, ways of working that you didn't have to reinvent a solution every time. We were really good at firefighting and solving problems, but we never fixed the underlying processes so that you didn't have the fires to start with. And so I've taken that kind of as my personal mission, both across the organization, but also within HR as a function, to try and figure out how do we make work easier. And oftentimes that it's a hard transition for the organization to make. Because what it means in a lot of cases is more standard process, more automation, more systems reliance, and then you have to build your systems in order to be able to do that. And it takes a little bit of autonomy and control out of an individual's hands that has always been, they've been successful because that's the way that they've worked. They've been able to solve everybody's problems through their sheer sweat and energy and personal perseverance. And so you got to kind of make that mind shift to how do we solve this from the root cause? So we've adopted strategies within SPX FLOW, things like A3 problem solving, which is kind of a lean technique that helps you kind of break down a problem and make sure you understand all the root causes, see all the data that leads up to that, and then use that to plan out your plan of attack and measure your results along the way. So we've had to adopt new skills and new capabilities across the organization to be able to make that shift.
That's not so traditionally seen as a role for HR, right?
I think it's a really important role for HR. I think that, I tend to come back to the Kenneth Galbraith 5-star model of organization effectiveness, which is you've got to have all of these different pieces of the organization aligned. You have your goals and objectives aligned with your structure, with your organizational structure. You have to have it aligned with your processes and systems and like how things actually work in the organization. You have to have it aligned with your people capabilities. And the fifth is your incentives and rewards and recognition. And so all those pieces have to get together. And HR, I think, has a really critical role in making all that work because we can put all the most beautiful incentives in the world in place.
Yeah, exactly.
You can hire the best people. If your processes and systems don't work, if it's hard for people to get their job done because, they have to go into 5 different systems in order to get a piece of data to share with the customer, then none of the other stuff matters. And so I think that HR can actually play a really strong role in identifying where there are process breakdowns and making work harder for the team or making it really inefficient, identifying those and facilitating conversations around getting work started to fix it.
One thing we didn't speak about as well is, what happens to the people who can't or won't go along with the change journey? How have you dealt with those people over the years? Obviously, it's something that not many people talk about.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because you want your employees to come along with you. You want your team members to feel a part of it. There always will be some portion, and it's going to, 10%, let's say, that are just never going to get there. And as harsh as this sounds, is like the faster you can get them out of the organization, the better, because it's a drag on the rest. So you're going to have 10% that are like super excited, can't wait to get started, looking for change all the time. You've got 80% in the middle that need to be convinced and kind of brought along. You got to show me that this is going to work. Yeah. And then you've got the remainder that, no matter what you show them, no matter what happens, they don't believe in it. Maybe it doesn't align to their personal values of what's important to them or how they want to spend their time or how they think about work. And so you always want to be respectful in how you are exiting those individuals from the organization. But you really just need to move on. And this is a big lesson that I've learned, is like every time I've waited to do that and thinking, oh my gosh, this group of individuals,
a bit more time.
They have so much institutional knowledge, and maybe we can get them there, and we're going to be, things are going to fall through the cracks if these individuals leave. Once they've left, the organization just blossoms around them, and you don't even realize what a weight it was on their peers and their colleagues to be dealing with that, and this resistance and inability to change. And then once they're gone, just everybody steps up and they do things differently, and they do things even better than you thought they could do them. And it's happened to me every single time. So that's, if I had a lessons learned, like, don't be afraid to let those people move on. Facilitate it, let it happen early, treat them obviously with respect, and do what you can to ease their transition. But it's not good for the company, and it's not good for them either, because they're just miserable all the time. It's like, I don't want people to be miserable coming into work every day.
Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely, I enjoyed it.
Joining us on the show, and you definitely provided some great actionable advice for everyone listening. So I really appreciate that. Before we wrap up, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice you could give to the other sort of HR leaders on their transformational journey in their business, what would that be? And also, if they want to reach out to you and have any questions that want to connect, what's the best way for them to do so?
On the first question, is kind of like the biggest piece of advice for the transformational journey: stay connected to your peers and to the key stakeholders in the transformation. Stay connected down into the organization, understand how it's working. Are the things that you've planned up here at the systems level, it's actually making its way through. So spend time in the field talking to team members about what they're seeing is important and what they think the organization wants them to do, so that you can identify where it's working and where it's not, and make mid-course corrections. So you could, once again, you're going to have this beautiful transformation plan that you want to just take step by step, and it's going to evolve as well as you find out what's working and what's not. But you have to actually go out and look for what's working and what's not. So spend the time and the energy to do that. And so, so if folks want to reach out to me, definitely LinkedIn. I keep a close eye on that. And so I'll respond to messages that come through there. And that's probably the easiest way to find me.
Amazing. Well, thanks again. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. It's been a pleasure. Definitely going to be flying over to see you guys soon, so can't wait for that. For everyone listening, as always, appreciate you joining us, taking your time out of your busy day to join us here live on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed the show, please take a second to like, comment, and share. Obviously, we want to share this great experience with as many people as possible, so please take a moment to share. Also, if you're new to the live show, you can also subscribe on any platform that you could possibly think of. We're everywhere. So to open your favorite app, we'll be in there, so you can subscribe as well. Apart from that, thank you again for taking the time out to join us, Belinda, and I wish you all the best until we next speak. Okay?
Absolutely. Have a great day.